How to use Adobe Lightroom and make a not so great looking picture look great. So here you'll go to File, Add Photos. Obviously it'll look a little different if you are using a PC, but no problem, it still works the same. So you're going to select your photo, review for import, and for example purposes we are going to use this photo right here. Oops. So this is a photo of one of our new products. It is the interior cleaner, and it just looks a little bit dull, so we're going to brighten it up a bit. But first, what we're going to do, since it's for the purposes of posting to Instagram, we are going to crop it to 4:5 because that is the standard size that Instagram works with. And since I don't really care about anything in this background, I just care about Brie, the product, and the fact that she's in a Ferrari, I'm going to move the cropping to here. We're going to try to keep the product in the center aspects of the photo. A little offsetting is okay. I think that makes the photo look a little more dynamic. But we will go ahead and crop it like that. And then what I like to do is I like to first brighten the exposure up. I like the look of the increased contrast. I will typically turn up the highlights, and obviously it's going to be different for every picture, so you can use your creative ability to do this as you see fit. I really like the look of the high contrast pictures, so I'm going to turn the shadows down. Whites, let's see how that looks. I like the whites up. I very much wing it on every single picture, to be honest with you, and just scroll on these options until I think they look great. So for editing purposes of this picture, I increased everything except the shadows. Obviously this is not a completed picture yet. So what I want to do, I don't want to mess with the tint or the temperature until I've turned the vibrance up. I really like bright colors, and this is a great picture because we've got the red interior of the Ferrari contrasted with the green bottle of the interior cleaner, so I really want to emphasize that great color play there. I'll maybe increase the saturation just a little bit, but I really don't want Brie to look orange, So now this is, in my opinion, you're about 85% done here, but there are a couple last touches that I like to do to really make the image of the bottle pop. I don't feel like any tint is needed or any temperature changes are needed. If anything, I might decrease the temperature like -4, -5, but I think it looks fine the way it is. And for teaching purposes, I'm not going to worry too much about it. So in really easy terms, you can go down to the radial gradient, draw a little radius around the product, and this makes it really easy to create a really beautiful vignette. I don't know how to pronounce it. Vignette. I don't know. Vignette around the subject of the photo. So what I typically do is, so this is just for dramatization purposes. Oops. So what you want to do is check that invert. Obviously the picture won't look like this forever, but just for teaching purposes, I want to show you that the feather feature, increasing it will make the border more feathery, decreasing it will make it a stark circle just like that. So I typically keep the feathering pretty high. If I were going to do a radial gradient here, I typically decrease the exposure, increase the contrast. This is obviously incredibly dramatic because we're not going to use the radial gradient here, but I just wanted to show you for teaching's sake. And then obviously play around with the highlights, the shadows, the whites, the blacks, until you get something that you are very happy with. So since we are not going to use the radial gradient, we're just going to delete it. And what I'm going to use is the linear gradient because I don't think that a radial gradient does this image justice because we want to have both the product and Brie's face in the light because that's what people are going to be paying the most attention to. So I'm going to start down here. If you can see my cursor, I'm going to draw a gradient right here and use essentially the same exact settings as I did for the radial gradient. I'm going to turn the exposure down quite a lot. It's going to seem dramatic as you're doing it. I'm actually going to move this up. It's going to seem dramatic as you're doing it, but when you see the before and after, it looks really, really, really great. So I'm going to turn the exposure down. I'm going to turn the contrast up. Highlights I'll play with a little bit. Shadows I'll play with. That looks great. Whites, we'll turn the whites up to make it not too dramatic. Blacks we'll leave the same, maybe decrease a little bit. I don't typically touch the texture, clarity, dehaze, or the saturation or any of these, just because I don't think it's necessary, especially just for Instagram purposes. So once you're done with this radial gradient, I'm going to, the great thing about Lightroom is that it uses your settings from your last radial gradient onto your next one. So when you're ready to do your next one, all you got to do is just make another one. You can increase the size and obviously this is incredibly dramatic, so I actually will go in and decrease the settings here, but for teaching purposes, you can see that Lightroom uses the same exact settings as your last radial gradient. So I'll turn the exposure up a little bit, I'll turn the contrast down a bit. But as you can see, we're losing the parts of the picture that we don't want our followers to look at. We want our followers to look at the red interior of the Ferrari. We want them to look at Brie, and most importantly, we want them to look at the brand new product right here. So I'm happy with how this looks down here. Now I'm going to take another radial gradient and bring it right down here. And I'm not totally happy with how this looks yet. Obviously, you can move these around. You can come near it and rotate it as you see fit, but it's just a little too bright up here. So I'm going to decrease the size of this to make the difference a little bit, to make the gradient a little bit shorter. I'm going to rotate it just a tad, and I'm going to turn the exposure down. What's going to make a really big difference here is I'm going to turn the whites really down. The whites, turn the blacks down, turn the contrast, I'll turn the contrast down actually. I'll decrease that exposure a little bit more. And honestly, I'm pretty happy with that. So obviously this was just for teaching purposes. I did post this photo a couple of days ago or about a week ago. So my favorite thing about Lightroom is that when you are all finished, you can press the backslash button to see what the photo looked like originally. So you can see it's super dull, you don't really know what you're supposed to be looking at, and when you're all done, you press that again, and you can see your eye is immediately drawn to the new product, the red interior, and Brie. So yeah, that's it.